Good morning, people. How are you doing? It's your boy, Dr. Will, and I'm here with another episode. And we're going to be talking about blended learning with a special attention to Schoology. And we have Chris Aviles with us this morning. Saw him earlier repping that Schoology shirt. So he's all in the mindset. Uh, so, Chris, for those who may stumble across this podcast and they're wondering who is Chris Aviles? They're probably gonna say the same thing about me. So, what? Introduce yourself to the people.
Oh, Dr. Will, I am from the great state of New Jersey. As of a couple weeks ago, I was a high school English teacher for 9 years, but in December, I transferred over to being an ed tech coach at a new school district. I'm a huge fan of blended learning and gamification. I'm a Google certified teacher. I was a lead learner in Austin, Texas, and I was actually Schoology's National Teacher of the Year last year. So I'm excited to be here and show you some of the really cool stuff that you can do with Schoology when it comes to blending your classroom.
Excellent, excellent. So, everyone, we got the right guest on the show this morning. So, what I happen to love about blended learning is the ability to uh, not only differentiate, but you can personalize learning, and it also, quite honestly, frees up the teacher to actually get a handle on what she teaches and how she teaches. For example, if you have 25, 30 kids in your classroom, if 15 to 20 are on Schoology doing work, he or she has a smaller group that can actually have discussions and do different work with to actually go deeper into the learning, so to speak. So that's one of the reasons I'm such a huge proponent of it. So there are going to be some people again. They're going to go, well, what is blended learning? I don't know what blended learning is. So let's get right into it. So what would you say is your definition of blended learning?
So blended learning is when students learn at least partially online. They go to the face-to-face class, but there's some online component that students are responsible for. How much they learn online is really up to the discretion of the teacher. When I first started blending 3 years ago, I would say they were about 25% learning online, 75%, with me, 50-50 in year two, and then this last year, my class has been 100% blended. Because I am now a big believer that blending your classroom is the single best thing that you can do as a teacher. Like I said before, I'm a huge fan of gamification. I'm a big fan of a lot of other educational techniques, but to me, blended learning is by far the single best thing that a teacher can do. Even if it's a little bit or a lot, it's really valuable for the reasons that you said. If you get yourself a learning management system, because think about it now, if you're going to learn online, or you're going to have your students learning online, there needs to be a headquarters or like a repository where you're putting your stuff. So a learning management system is kind of like the headquarters or the home base where your kids go and they can get worksheets or assignments or do activities or have discussions and stuff like that. And for me, no learning management system is better than Schoology. And like you were saying before, for me, the big thing is it allows for differentiation. It actually makes your life as a teacher so much better. And I think we really need to kind of update our practices to get, to kind of meet the needs of today's kids. Our kids spend a ton of time online. I think they feel comfortable online. And we're getting to the point where the whole wealth of human knowledge is on the computer. I'm no longer the smartest person in the room. The computer, the search engines, the information that we can get on the computer, I'll never be able to compete with that. So the best thing that I can do as a teacher now, I think in the 21st century, is become more of a guide rather than the person that stands in front of the classroom. I think kids need to be hands-on, they need to be active, and that can happen through blended learning. And so, I mean, that's just a few of the things that make blended learning great. But I think a major point that's overlooked so often is how blended learning allows you to build relationships. Being big and brown, I have the toughest kids in my school district. Blended learning has pretty much all but stopped any issues that I've had because kids are learning online, self-directed, self-paced at their own pace. And the beautiful thing is now I can move around the room while kids are working, and I can talk to kids, help kids that are struggling, and build relationships because I'm no longer on the stage in the front. So for me, I would say the relationships, the differentiation, and the ways that they make my life easier as a teacher is why I'm a huge fan of blended learning and Schoology.
Excellent, excellent. Now, so before we dive into Schoology, um, let's sort of get into a couple of the instructional practices of blended learning, because when we're talking about putting stuff into Schoology using a learning management system, uh, I want the audiences to understand that we're not just talking about um, throwing stuff up on Schoology or another learning management system and just being done with it. Like, there is a purpose, a strategy behind it. So if you will, could you bring up a couple of instructional blended learning practices, explain them, and then we can go ahead and get into how that works out with Schoology.
So let me tell you then what my class would look like if you came in. I taught on a 90-minute block, and you would come into my classroom. My kids come into my classroom. They know that they have their do now that they have to do as soon as they come in, right? Their anticipatory set. So they come in. It was usually an SAT question of the day, and then they would do a journal for their anticipatory set, something having to do with what we were going to learn that day. I did no more than 20 minutes of direct instruction or review after the journal. So that leaves me with 60 minutes. And at that time, kids went onto their devices. We were bringing your own device, whether you had cell phones or iPads, or I found some desktops that I built and brought them into school. Kids were able to then jump on their devices and start learning again at their own pace and stuff like that. What allowed me to do, no more than 20 minutes of direct instruction, a really big part of Blend in Your Classroom. I wish teachers would record themselves. And not necessarily a flipped classroom, because I'm not a huge fan of the flipped classroom, but I love the idea of a teacher recording themselves. So after I would do 20 minutes of direct instruction, the kids would go on Schoology and start to learn. There would be, between a 5 and 7 minute video that was a summary of that 20-minute direct instruction that I did. So that way kids who didn't understand it the first time, kids who were absent, could go and review that video. It was nice too, because as a teacher it freed me up to do other things that I wasn't having to constantly repeat or go over the same things. Kids could go review that video, and the rule was watch the video, ask a friend, ask Google, and then you can come ask me. And it was very rarely that kids did those steps and then had to come to me because they didn't understand something like a thesis or an introductory paragraph or something that we were reading like Catcher in the Rye. So it allows for kids, and it was neat because kids would take out their phones, they would pop in their headphones, and they would go and they would rewatch the short video that I made. Or if they were ready to start their work, it was up on Schoology and they could go and get started. So I mean, I think that's one of the biggest techniques is you have to have a video for kids to check out. I would do screencasts and show kids how to do certain things. There was linked to sources they might need, their work, because while every once in a while I did have a worksheet, if you put a worksheet online, it's the same as just giving them a worksheet on a piece of paper. So another great thing that blended learning allows us to do is have discussions. I think one of the ways that my Schoology setup is unique, if I show you guys later, is I had 4 classes. Two were low-level classes, and the other 2 were honors classes. And I put them all into one giant class. And students were having discussions, between classes and stuff like that. So I was no longer limited to students working in the class with kids that they saw every day. My honors kids were working with my other low-level kids, and I really felt that they started to model the behaviors that they saw when we had the online discussions. Something else that blended allowed me to do was assign new types of assignments, I guess you could say. So if you remember, like, remember when you do groups, you used to assign roles, like somebody was always like the recorder, somebody was always like the note taker, that kind of like thing.
Hmm.
So one of the more cool things that I did was I made somebody become like the documentary person. So one person was responsible for recording like the group project and recording the group, not making the project, working on the project, discussing the project, and then they would upload that to Schoology, and we would have like a 5-minute documentary of, like behind the scenes how they made this project. So I wasn't just seeing the end result, but I was also seeing the process. Um, so I mean, it's really great when you start to think outside the box. I had a kid who was on homebound, and I would take my iPad, I would put up in the corner, and I would do a Hangout or a FaceTime with the student who was on homebound, and so he actually never missed a day in class. And so he was there and able to see the lecture. He was able to do the work online, participate in the discussion with students. And so even though he was out of school for 6 months, he never missed one of my classes. So it's this idea that using blending, time and space kind of aren't the same as they are in a regular classroom. I don't have to constantly repeat myself. I don't constantly have to print out worksheets or rubrics and stuff like that because it's all there for them. So it's really fantastic when you start to think about all the possibilities. One of my favorite things on Schoology is students' ability to inbox me. So like a private message. So kids who are confused, kids who have a question, kids who might need something, or you'd be surprised. We talked about building relationships, how often they say, oh, did you see this? Look at this, check out this video. My kids know that I was a huge Edgar Allan Poe fan, and so I would get so much Edgar Allan Poe stuff from the kids in my inbox. Look at this video, check out this article. Or the other way that works is I can send a message out to all of my students at once, and it would show up on their cell phone. So I would remind them about quizzes, remind them about homework, remind them about something coming up, or something that's going to be on TV. And so there was this kind of communication that didn't stop in the classroom. And there's a lot of really neat things you could do with that, taking that step further on Schoology. Schoology has the ability to put on add-ons. And so, my favorite add-ons are, things like Dropbox and Google Drive and stuff like that. But they have a great add-on called, oh, of course, now I'm going to forget it, but it was called Back Channel Chat. And so it was basically a chat room. And so what I started to do is I set up office hours. So my kids knew that Tuesdays and Thursdays from 6 to 7, I will be in the chat room if you need any help. And it was funny because some kids would come in and they would want help on a paper. Some kids would want to come in and just hang out. I had parents who would come in and just say nice things about the class. It was cool. So, when you show a movie in class, you show clips in class, kids often want to talk about it and stuff like that. And so using that same back channel app on Schoology, instead of having discussion out loud and disrupting the clips of the movies, they had the discussion in the chat room while we were all in class watching the movie. So we back channeled the movie and stuff like that. And so when you talk about blending, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you can do. It solves a ton of problems. Differentiation is fantastic. Which, I mean, almost deserves its own show or own discussion using Schoology, because that's one of my favorite things is the differentiation Schoology allows. But it really makes everything better, in my opinion.
Okay. So, I'm a teacher. I have created my account, and uh, I'm now what? So what do I do then? So let's get into the sort of the interface in terms of how I can create. I can do updates. I can create classes, resource folder, and assign work to students. So what are the practical uses of and utility of it once my account is created?
So let me share my screen then, and I'll take you through real quick some of the features and great things about Schoology. So as I share my screen, if you follow my mouse, materials is where students will find their work, or where you as the teacher will create their work. As far as updates, that's how I talk to my entire class. you can see I can write a message, and then I could go from there and talk to the kids. So that's how you'd send out an update, and I have it set for all my students to have it pop up as a text message notification on their cell phones.
Mm.
So it's kind of neat. I'll do it in class sometimes. You hear all their phones start to beep as the message comes through. And even that little thing has made such a difference with homework, such a difference with being prepared for tests and quizzes, because the night before or day before, I'll send them out a reminder. Because, you know, it makes me laugh. I'll put dates and times on Schoology. I write dates and times on the board at school, but they're still kids and they forget or they always ask. And sending out that reminder has made a huge difference. But when you take a look at this, which is the main section, this is where you put all of your work. So I said my class was gamified, and one thing that you could do is you could put links right on the main site. So my kids would log in, and let's say if they wanted to check on their gamified classroom, they would click this link, and this is, you know, part of my classroom that students can go and check out. So that link at the top is always there for them because they're going to need it the whole year. Something else they're going to need the whole year is their rubrics. So again, my class is a video game, so I call it like the Armory. And in the Armory is all of their rubrics. In the Armory is all the links to things like Student Help Center, Google Support Center, and this is there for them all year. And so it's a link to my YouTube channel and stuff like that. So students will always know where to go to find rubrics, and I'm not constantly printing them out and handing them out and stuff like that. So if I wanted to show, you know, if my students were doing an infographic, this is what the rubric would look like for them. So they always have the rubric there at their disposal. So I would totally suggest for teachers to have, you know, kind of like a folder, and you can see we can create folders. So I go add materials. I can add an assignment, quiz, file, discussion, page, stuff like that. I can add a folder, and in each folder there's kind of like a theme. So you'll see as well, you know, the Armory again is where the basic resources they're going to need all year. Again, my class is a video game, so instead of units I call them levels. You can see that each student has levels. Now this is where Schoology takes it to the next level. If you notice down here, besides the fact that I've hidden them because they're not currently working on them, so that means a student can't see it, and if I wanted to show a student, I can unhide things and stuff like that. So I would probably create and work on stuff as a teacher while it was hidden, and then when I wanted to assign it to the kids, I would unhide it. What's great is you see students must complete by a date and time. So if I come over here and I go to edit, I can actually, let me zoom out. It says date and it says end date, so I can make it, you know, this unhides itself automatically at 9:29 at 8:40 a.m. and then it hides itself at 10:15. So I can actually set it to be available to students and then not be available to students. Available after start date, during during a range and stuff like that. So what's great is I have control over when work appears, when work disappears. And so what's great is inside I have all of their work for a unit, and it's usually about 2 weeks. And my favorite thing about Schoology is called student progress. If I were to click on this button while they were working, it would show you what percentage of the work a student has completed. As a teacher, I could just click on student progress and I can see where my students are at. And I can start with my students who, you know, maybe are at 10 or 15% when the rest of the class is at 50%. I've now identified the kids who are behind without having to embarrass them by calling them over or talk to them. And so I go right over to a kid who might be at a lower percentage than I would like them to be, and I would say, hey, you know, I noticed that you are, you know, at 15%. How's it going? Is anything going on? And sometimes kids says, oh, I've been goofing off, or no, I don't understand this, or, you know, oh, I'll get back to work. So I can see who is behind without having to have any, you know, conversations that might make them feel uncomfortable. On the inverse, if I see a kid is way ahead, I can ask them to help other students, or, you know, when I make my way around to those kids, I can ask them, how's soccer going, how's football going, and build those relationships. So this is great because this will show you a percentage bar where kids are, and it gives you a snapshot of how, you know, how a kid is working their way through the level. Because the other thing about this is they can work at their own pace. when I set up my options for student completions, I actually make, each assignment, and then I have it set for students, must view this item, score at least a 400 out of 500. So I'm setting the requirements for students to be able to move on to the next assignment. So as I create assignments, I think about, okay, what do I want my kids to do? So the first thing you'll see is a screencast. I wanted my kids to get used to making online portfolios using Google Sites. So as you can imagine, some kids have never used a Google site, made a website, and so that was difficult for them. So what I did is I made a screencast of myself, and hopefully you can hear it, but it talks to the kids about how to do an online portfolio using Google Sites. And so that was the first thing I had my kids learn about was in this level, because as they did their work in this level, they had to put it on their portfolio. So now if they forget or they were absent or they don't understand, they can go and see this over and over again at their own pace. And so I give them some free resources like Screencast-O-Matic is a free way to do screencasting, and there's a video of what you can do with screencasting. But the nice thing is that's always there for them. So once they view that, they can then go to the next assignment. And so for them, I usually do like a little bit of an update. So we were talking about the Columbian Exchange, and we were talking about the long-term impact of Christopher Columbus coming to the United States. And so, they get like some essential questions, what I expect them to know by the end of this unit. And again, this is all at their own pace. Kids are learning online while I'm in the classroom, and I'm circulating, I'm helping, I'm building relationships. Kids are working, and what's nice is some of my toughest kids who were behavior problems for other teachers weren't really behavior problems in my class because they could go at their own pace. I was there to help them. Everybody got, at least 5-6 minutes individual attention, and so it was really kind of neat. One of my favorite things to do is I would make a quiz. So I would have my students read, and I should say I kind of designed my levels based on Bloom's taxonomy, so kind of gaining that knowledge and moving from there. So they would read something, but then they had to show me that they understand what they read by answering a 5-question quiz. They had to score a 400 out of 500 on this quiz before they were allowed to continue. But the great thing was they could take this quiz over and over again as many times as they wanted to. And so you can see, students here, he took it 27 times before he got it correct. And so that's real mastery learning, because the other great thing you can do is you can see here I have random questions.
Mm-hmm.
I will make 25 questions, but I will only have 5 questions appear on a student quiz. And what it does is it pulls randomly from that pool of 25 questions, so every quiz is different. So not only the question's different because it's pulling out of a pool, it's different because I randomize the question order and then I randomize the answer. So students can't turn and look at somebody else's phone or ask, necessarily, because everybody's got a different quiz. And what's great is, and you can see these are all the questions that are pulling from. So they'll pull 5 questions out of these, 12 or 15 that I made. And to me, I think it really gives a good example of students having to learn something because, the questions are different. And it's not hard. It's not made to trick them or anything. It's just basic, proof that they understood what they read. Because how can I go to that higher level thinking if they don't have a basic knowledge of what they've been working on? So I love Schoology's test and quizzes. They automatically grade. Even short answer automatically grades itself. And so it's fantastic to me because it automatically grades. Once a student completes the requirement, so gets a 400 out of 500, it automatically unlocks the next assignment for them. So I'm not involved, in this stuff that to me I don't need to be involved in. Oh, you finished this? Okay, here's the next assignment. It's doing it for me. I have so much free time in class to build relationships. It's fantastic, and it makes a big difference. So in my quest, in my class, I call work quests. So a side quest is something that they do. This is to create an infographic. And what's great is you can see here the submissions. I go and I click, and here's a student's infographic. And I can go through and I can review them. I can check them out. Here's the next student, and I'm given feedback and stuff like that. And so it's fantastic for me to have the ability now, not have my desk to be a complete mess, but to have, kind of everything in one place. To me, this is faster and easier for me to grade and stuff like that. So, I mean, I really enjoy it. So let me show you this. This is kind of neat. Um, you'll see here students are participating in discussion.
Yep.
And you'll notice this little icon here. If I click on it, it tells you assigned to one student, and that student had this delivered to them. What's great about this is I can take any assignment and I can deliver it to an individual kid or a group of kids. So in my class, students learn in groups. I call them guilds to fit my gamified class. And so guilds have a name. There might be 4 or 5 students. I can assign a guild a specific assignment. And what's great is nobody else knows when anybody is getting. So I can make 3 or 4 different assignments, and I can assign them individually to a student, and nobody knows when anybody else is working on it. Or I can assign them to a group. So imagine the power, not just for differentiation, but I give my kids a menu. If you remember, I said self-directed. So my kids get an opinion. They get some say in what they learn. So I might say, okay, do you want to do one of these 4 projects? One of these problem-based learning, kind of things, and they sign up for them, and then I individually assign each group, what they wanted to work on, or I allow them to create their own assignment. So the ability to assign things to a student without other students knowing, to me, is fantastic. Because, like I said, if you go and I look at my discussions, you'll see I have students, kind of reflect toward the end. All of these students, looking from the outside, you have no idea who's an honors kid, and you have no idea who, they put into a low-level class, because they're all learning together. And you can see the responses. I mean, I'd take that from anybody. These are pretty well, written, well thought out paragraphs. And so for me, this is really great, because a student who might never have gotten to work together now can. And actually, this year was the first year. I remember at the beginning of the year, I had a student ask me, can I work with my friends in another class? And I never tried it before, but I figured, you know what, let me do it. So for the first time in my teaching career, I had 2 students in period 2, and they were teamed up with 2 students in period 4. And they worked asynchronously. So my period 2 kids would work on something, and then when my period 4 kids came in, they would pick up using Schoology where period 2 left off. So I no longer have to group kids with kids that are in class together. I mean, and this can only get bigger. There's a school district by me that uses this, and before I left the classroom, I was actually going to team up with her in a different school, and our kids were going to do group projects from a different school, because I can add more than one teacher to Schoology in my blended classroom. So kids are moving through self-directed. They're self-paced because they can move through their own pace. They have requirements that they have to meet, and this is how I keep an eye on them through student progress. I kind of model my blended learning practices based on Bloom's taxonomy. So the deeper they get into the level, the more in-depth it goes. My favorite one about this is, well, I'll tell you this. When you have a blended classroom, you want to have something called an anchor activity. What do students do when they are done, right? So the students that finish quickly, how do you keep them from going on to the next unit if that's what you want to do? Because I did theorize, again, before I left the classroom, I was going to have all of my work for the whole year available to the students, and they can actually do a whole year's worth of stuff at their own pace. I wasn't comfortable yet. I wasn't ready for that, so I kind of confined students to a unit. So what I did make was I called it a free play. Students could basically prove to me through any means that they want that they understood the level. And they can make as many of these as they want. And so you'll see some were suggested. So free plays, I gave them, here's some things you could do to show me that you have learned what was going on in the unit. Or a lot of these are tangential. So my male students loved the activity of making a working Native American weapon. And so you think about it now, I can't have kids coming into class shooting bow and arrows and throwing addle-addles at stuff. But they could do it at home in their backyard, videotape it, upload it to Schoology, and show me. And that's exactly what a lot of them did. And so this is how I kept my kids from, who got done early to, go far ahead, is I gave them some opportunities to do these cool projects, or I allowed them to make their own projects. I had one girl who made an awesome Mayan headdress. She looked up and researched, Mayan headdress, because I told them they were, a big part of their culture, and she came in with this unbelievable looking Mayan headdress. And that's what she did in class, with the time that she had after she finished the unit work. And so that's one thing, if you're in a blended classroom, have something ready for students who finish early. And so I think that's a great technique to have. But you can see, this took about 2 weeks. There's about 10 or 12 quests, and students could work at their own pace. If they got done early, there were anchor activities. After I would do my do now, after I would do my direct instruction or review, I would then tell students, okay, I would tell them, if you are not on this assignment or you are not at this % completion, you are behind. So I was always updating my kids on where they should be to finish on time. And what's nice is you start to see students who took responsibility. My school was big into athletics. So my kids who had sports, they might have back-to-back soccer games or something like that. You would see them do a lot of work on Monday and Tuesday to get ready for Wednesday and Thursday. They started to model their own time. There were some students who would prefer to read at home or prefer to read in the quiet section I made in my class, and they would do their group projects in class, or students would do their group projects at home with their friends, and they would do the individual stuff in class. So giving students a choice about learning, how they think they learn best, to me was important. I will tell you, from a classroom management standpoint, the one thing you want to preach to your kids from the beginning, it was a sin in my class to be doing nothing. If my students were not being productive, that is the only time I had a problem. And so my students know when they are in my classroom, they're expected to be working. How they work and what they work on, who they work with, that's really up to them. As long as they're being productive, I do not have a problem. And again, by checking that little student progress that shows you each student's % completion of the unit, I knew who was on pace, I knew who was behind, and I knew who was ahead. And I was able to plan for that, and I was able to prepare myself for that, and deliver basically an individual, personalized learning experience to every kid. Because especially the deeper they go into the levels, the more they get to choose what they do. They get to choose what they learn. So they can write a paper, they can do a speech, they can do a project, and it really made a big difference. And maybe I'll leave you with this, my biggest success story. I had a kid who was the toughest kid in school. He got thrown out of his other English class. They put him in my class, and I had a discussion with this kid, and he basically told me that he's never done well in school, he hates school, stuff like that. The fact that he could do this work and see his grading and see his progress really helped contribute to that feeling of success. But my favorite part was when he got to the area where he had to choose a project, he comes up to me and he says, I can do whatever I want. I said, yeah, for the most part. I said, as long as it's about the topic we're covering, we can do whatever we want. And this happened to be in a unit where I was teaching about how the brain works, and the more you practice and try something, the better you get, and there's no such thing as not being a math person or not being an English person. If you want to learn something and you have the drive to do so, you can do it. So a kid who may never have done a project in his life, because you think about a teacher gives a project, do this. Well, that's no fun. The kid who wants to be an electrician, he goes, well, I want to create a brain that attaches to a light switch, that when I flip the light switch, the light bulb in the brain lights up, and then I'll label the different parts of the brain. He said, can I do that? I said, absolutely. Not only if you do that, I said, I'll hang it up on my wall. And a kid who's never done a project, a kid who has failed every class and is really struggling, I think he was a senior in my sophomore English class, he brought in this beautifully wired brain labeled with a light switch that lit up the two parts of the brain. I was really proud of the kid. And I was excited to see him happy that he was successful. I mean, the kid was 18 years old. He was a tough kid. Nobody really messed with him in class. But he was really happy when I hung his project on my wall. And so to me, that's what's really special about blended learning, is it gives kids opportunities that they may not have had before. A lot of kids don't do well in school because they don't know what it's like to be successful. But when they're moving at their own pace, when they're moving, with a choice in what they're doing, when they know, when there's some of these quizzes that they have no choice but to pass them, right? Because I showed you this quiz, they have to get a 400 out of 500. They could take it over and over again as many times as they want. I try to make it so my kids have no choice but to be successful. And that's not possible without Schoology and blended learning. I mean, you can imagine just the logistical nightmare of having to regrade a quiz over and over again, or even creating a quiz that really tests the student knowledge, over and over again. And with Schoology, it takes me just a few minutes. So, I mean, I'm such a huge fan of blended learning, and I really do predict that this is the way it's going to look in the future. Is teachers are going to be, encouraged more and more to make a student-centered classroom where they're there to support the students in their own learning rather than direct instruction, lecture, and then, whether it's worksheets or a project that they have created that everybody has to do, because we know not everybody learns the same, and we know, a student's home life and personality also contribute to how they learn in the classroom. So that's just some of the neat stuff you can do with Schoology. And anybody watching who is uncertain about whether or not they should blend their classroom, it has made the biggest difference in my teaching career. And Schoology, I've tried every learning management system out there. Nobody comes close to Schoology. What's really cool is I never show kids how to use Schoology because it's really intuitive. It looks like Facebook. And in the 3-4 years I've used Schoology, I've never sat in class and said, well, here's how you use it. I say, go do this, and they either figure it out on their own, they ask their friends, or they have the link to the Student Help Center and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's been fantastic, Dr. Will. Blended learning is a huge passion of mine, and I would love to see people, use it more.
Awesome, awesome. Now, there's some other things, and I got to do another show because there were things that you can do with Schoology in terms of when you're creating these assignments, you can set them to actual standards, and then later on actually look at the mastery of their students to be able to see, well, James Edwards on this standard has this percentage of mastery or whatever. So there's lots of you can do that.
Absolutely, yeah.
As well as there's like I don't want to call it a parent portal, but parents can actually check out what their students are actually doing in the classroom. So in our district or whatever, there's something called Active Parent that people can check out as well. But within this management system, the thing about that is you actually get to see the work and all that good stuff. So it is very interesting to see that. There's a lot of other things, and we are actually using Schoology for PD purposes with teachers as well. And part of it is if you're going to teach as a teacher using blended learning, to get that perspective of the student to become a learner in a blended learning environment is a great way for you to kind of understand on your end, okay, how am I going to set this up? So we're doing that. So yeah, with Schoology you can do so much. So we're going to have to do another show. But Chris, again, I thank you very much on this early Saturday morning coming here to give you expertise. I definitely appreciate it. Do you have any parting words for the viewers?
As far as blended learning, like I said, give it a try, even if you start small. Like I said, when I first started, maybe 25% of my class was online, the other 75% was more traditional. And as I got more comfortable and as I got more confident and as I started to see the difference it was making in my students' learning, a year or two later, my whole class was blended. So definitely try it, and there's no shortage of people out there and resources that you can learn and kind of help yourself if you're uncomfortable. But I mean, it really makes a huge difference. It really does.
Excellent, excellent. Well, again, I appreciate you, Chris, for coming on the show. Thank you very much, people who will hopefully watch the show, and we'll see you again on another episode.
All right, thank you, Dr. Will, for having me.